In honor of Black History Month, we're looking at some of the forgotten stars and teams that played right here in Central Texas. Fox 44's Cameron Stuart is in the studio with part one of the Forgotten Faces of Baseball.
These are the forgotten faces of baseball, resigned to grainy photographs and mythical lore simply because of their time and place in history. You won't find their baseball cards in your grandfather's attic, you won't see stadiums bearing their name, and you can't pull up their highlights on YouTube. These are the legends of the Negro Leagues, made in Central Texas.
In a lot of these cities, really the only gatherings they could have that they knew would be safe and just all right would be church gatherings and baseball gatherings.
Before Jackie Robinson broke baseball's color barrier in 1947, the best black ball players in the country showcased their talent in the Negro Leagues for teams like the Homestead Grays, the Pittsburgh Crawfords, and the Birmingham Black Barons. In the Jim Crow South, the Texas Negro League served as a semi-professional league full of barnstorming teams, and Waco was always right in the thick of it with teams like the Black Navigators, the Black Cardinals, and most notably, the Waco Yellow Jackets.
Kind of one of the Rosetta Stone for Waco Negro League baseball history is this team that often gets mentioned in association with Rube Foster, and that's the Waco Yellow Jackets.
Rube Foster, a Hall of Fame pitcher and the founder of the top-flight Negro Leagues as we know them, not only played in Waco, but was born in Calvert.
Maybe just for producing Rube Foster, just the most important team in Texas Negro League history was the Waco Yellow Jackets.
Each time one league folded and another started, Waco always had one of the flagship clubs, but very little is known about the teams because local media did not cover them. But for the black baseball fans in the city, Katy Park was their cathedral.
It was kind of the focal outdoor major gathering point for important events, and when significant teams and personalities would come to Waco and they needed a large space, Katy Park was the spot.
Now, all the local Negro League teams would have played at Katy Park, which was situated right behind me here in downtown Waco. One of its claims to fame was in 1929 when the New York Yankees came to town, featuring Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and the rest. But for Negro League fans in this community, their baseball royalty wouldn't come until the next year.
In 1930, the Kansas City Monarchs were barnstorming around, so traveling and playing different teams. And the big feature in that tour, in the May 1930 tour, was the Kansas City Monarchs had lights that they would travel with and nighttime baseball.
The Monarchs beat the Waco Black Cardinals 8-0 in the first ever night game played in Texas. And without being able to watch their favorite teams on TV or even read about them in the newspaper, these were once-in-a-lifetime events.
This is a community that probably would never have the opportunity to travel to Kansas City to see the major league of the Negro League players, some of the premier teams play on their home fields. So the fact that they would come to Waco, it must have been a must-see event for the African-American community.
Because of the lack of media coverage and social acceptance, Negro League players were forced to deal with unthinkably poor living and playing conditions, and much of their legend was left to oral history rather than pure statistics. For these invisible giants of the great American game, maybe there is something unique to their careers being told as legend.
But you know, almost poetically, some of these guys, the stories and the oral histories that have been handed down are almost more beautiful, more impressive, more legendary than if you have Josh Gibson's black and white, cut and dried, this is what he hit and how many at-bats, what his average was, how many home runs he hit.
Or maybe the real tragedy is this. Much like in The Outsiders, there are two groups of people from either side of town, and without knowing it, the same thing made them both smile.
Yeah, it's the same sunset. It's the same sport. It's the same church. But just the divide that still has not totally been completely healed.
In part two of our series on the Forgotten Faces of Baseball, we'll take a look at a Baseball Hall of Famer you've never heard of, and he grew up right under our noses. Stay tuned for that next week as we celebrate Black History Month on Fox 44 News. I'm Cameron Stuart.
As part of our Forgotten Faces of Baseball series honoring the Negro Leagues for Black History Month, Fox 44's Cameron Stuart takes us through the life, career, and legacy of Waco's greatest athlete you've never heard of.
When you think of famous people from Waco, what are the names that pop into your head? Maybe it's Chip and Joanna Gaines, maybe it's NFL legend LaDainian Tomlinson, or maybe it's a musician like Pat Green or the late Billy Joe Shaver. But you probably didn't think of Andrew Lefty Cooper, the Baseball Hall of Famer who was born, raised, and died right here in Waco. This is how the great Lefty got left behind.
He's considered one of the best 15, 20 Negro League players of all time, which would make him one of the best baseball players of any race.
A walk among the tombstones in Waco's Greenwood Cemetery will bring you to an unsuspecting gravesite with nothing distinguishing about it to tell you it's the final resting place of the city's only Baseball Hall of Famer. Andrew Lefty Cooper was born in Waco in 1896 and attended A.J. Moore High School before serving in the Army in World War I. While in the military, he played for some great Army baseball teams. Cooper then flourished as a pitcher for the Detroit Stars in the Negro Leagues, winning anywhere from 10 to 15 games a year in seasons much shorter than today's Major League, and even bringing baseball hysteria international.
He becomes a staple on the barnstorming tours of the Negro Leagues throughout the U.S. and then later becomes some of the first ones that head overseas. And Lefty's on the team that helped spark the rage and mania for baseball that continues in Japan to this very day.
Cooper's style was crafty, much more Tom Glavine than it was Randy Johnson, but just as effective.
One of the things the Negro League players said, when you faced him, you better have extra bats, because he would keep breaking that ball in around your fist and break your bat over and over again.
After a stellar career in Detroit, he moved on to Kansas City, where he managed the Monarchs into one of the greatest teams in Negro League history, led by fellow Hall of Famers Buck O'Neil and Bullet Joe Rogan. Yet the man who is buried roughly a mile away from the Texas Sports Hall of Fame has barely any recognition in his hometown.
We have one Baseball Hall of Famer in this town. He's buried right here. He's in Cooperstown, probably the premier Hall of Fame of all sports, but he's not in the Texas Sports Hall of Fame in Waco.
For years, Cooper historian Robert Darden has advocated not only for Cooper's enshrinement in the Texas Sports Hall of Fame, but also for a statue outside Baylor Ballpark. In a city where Magnolia has built an empire and heroes still get remembered, one local pioneer still has not gotten his due.
But as far as his legacy in Waco, as of February 2021, it's a small stone in Greenwood Cemetery at the confluence of two major highways and hard as heck to get to.
As we continue to honor Black History Month, next week we're going to take a look at the godfather of the Negro Leagues and his roots right here in Central Texas. For Fox 44 News, I'm Cameron Stuart.
Welcome back. As part of Black History Month, we're taking a look at the forgotten faces of baseball and the influence of the Negro Leagues here in Central Texas. Fox 44's Cameron Stuart has the story about the man responsible for making the league a national phenomenon.
Calvert, Texas isn't known for much, mostly just a pit stop on the drive from Waco to Houston, but it is home to one of the most influential men in baseball history, the godfather of the Negro Leagues, a man who gave the best black baseball players in the country an offer they couldn't refuse. In the pantheon of Texas athletes, Rube Foster doesn't have the pedigree of Roger Clemens, the aura of Earl Campbell, or the legacy of Lance Armstrong, thank God. He's more important to American sports than any of them.
He is the most influential figure in Negro League baseball history.
Calvert, Foster's hometown, is a cotton town barely big enough for 1,100 people and one stoplight. It sits roughly halfway between Waco and College Station, hardly the setting you'd expect to produce the man who created the professional Negro Leagues in 1920.
So Rube Foster, in my mind, is probably the key person that deserves study when you're talking about, serious scholarship on the Negro Leagues.
Although born down the road, Foster perfected his craft in Waco, where he became a legendary pitcher for the Waco Yellow Jackets.
There are even stories about him in Waco during his time there of winning 11 games in 11 nights in a row, which is just crazy whenever you think of pitcher usage these days.
Foster's impact on the game goes right down to his nickname that he earned by beating MLB All-Star Rube Waddell, and it has long been rumored that he gave pitching tips to New York Giants manager John McGraw and Hall of Fame pitcher Christy Mathewson when the team would train in Marlin.
There's a lot of stories, or whether they're backed up by actual fact or just myths, of him in the wintertime working with prominent white baseball players.
After his playing days, Foster sought to organize the barnstorming leagues into one official Negro major league, represented in the big cities in the Northeast and the Midwest. In 1920, the Negro National League was born under Foster's tutelage as president, and the Chicago American Giants, the club he owned and managed, was a founding member. For the decade leading to his death in 1930, he oversaw a farming ground of baseball's best talent, black or white, and even changed the way the game was played.
You know, it's called small ball today, but the Negro Leagues, and Rube Foster in particular, were very adept at hitting and running, laying down a bunt to get a player on first. Rube Foster was doing this years and years ago, really a pioneer of a lot of the baseball that we see today.
While his legacy is firmly entrenched in the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York, and the Negro League Museum in Kansas City, it's largely an afterthought in Calvert. Just a block over from the picturesque Main Street lays a different Calvert, the other side of the train tracks, where a historical marker honoring Foster sits outside a field that no longer even resembles a baseball diamond. The city of Calvert only put this historical marker for Foster here within the last decade, but if you drive by too fast, you might just miss it. It's a surprisingly small tribute for a man that was bigger than the game.
It's almost as if you can imagine Babe Ruth being combined with Branch Rickey. You know, both sides of the ledger as far as a great player and someone who knows the game and is able to organize these kind of independent leagues and traveling teams.
And maybe if some of these trailblazers had more recognition from their hometowns, it could inspire another generation to change the game.
To maybe inspire a young student on a field trip to say, hey, how come I can't check out a biography of Rube Foster or Andy Cooper in my library? Maybe I'll go out and do some research and write that book.